Hey, folks. Uh,
Oh,
Jeff Salzman here. Welcome to the Daily Evolver Live. I think we got here in good shape, and I'm here with Ankur Delight. Hey, Ankur.
hey Jeff, happy to be back.
Yeah, happy November as the
Happy
world
November.
turns,
That's
you
getting
right?
getting closer to that darkness, the
Yeah,
cold.
yeah. Here in the Northern Hemisphere.
Yeah,
Yeah, don't want to exhibit too much hemisphericism.
that's true. That's true. My friends in Argentina are having like a great summer right now.
I know. Well, so here we are, and the topic we have picked for today is the UAW strike,
Yeah,
United Auto Workers strike, which ended on Monday. And you suggested it, Encore. And so maybe I just turn it over and see what you're thinking and chime in as moved.
yeah, great. So there's two parts of this that I want to talk about. One is actually what happened, and one is just one quote that's a little bit of rhetoric that I have a bone to pick with. But let's just talk about what happened.
Cool.
And I looked at Reuters. I looked at the Economic Policy Institute, which is probably like a liberal think tank,
Yep.
and I looked at the Financial Times.
Okay.
And I was really surprised that they all were pretty much in agreement that this was a big win for the auto workers, and it was like a long deserved win.
Yeah.
And it goes back to the the crisis in 2008 and the kind of restructuring that happened with these companies, and the fact that like workers had to give up cost of living adjustments and a lot of other things. And so the wages, I think, what was the, look at the stats here, according to one of these things, the wages, like real wages, inflation adjusted wages, had declined 20% since 2008 to now. And at the same time, when the Treasury Department stepped in for, I think, two of those three companies, not Ford but the other two, they were like, hey, no more of these like big bonuses to the stockholders and dividends and all that. And so that stopped for a while, and then that ended in 2013. And since 2013, like the pay of like CEOs and upper management, all that has gone up by 40%. And around that time, consumer prices have also gone up 40%. So you will be happy to know that the CEOs are not, they're not feeling that pain of inflation because their salary went up consummately with inflation. So that's great. But the other people, the vast majority of people associated with these companies, are feeling basically the opposite. And so they're kind of getting back on track, is the idea.
Yeah.
And even in Financial Times, I was looking for some kind of counter narrative to this, and they didn't really give it to me. They only had one little comment about how this could affect the competitiveness of these three companies vis-a-vis other auto manufacturers. But then they follow that up with the whole paragraph about how one of these ratings agencies, which of course now I totally distrust after the 2008 thing, but just upgraded the rating of Ford right after this agreement. And they were like, yeah, they're going to have increased labor costs, but it's not a big deal because they have all these other things going for them. So
Yeah.
it just seems like a pretty big win
Yeah.
for for the workers and for the role of like unions in our society.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll have you like reflect on that from your integral lens, and then
Yeah.
I'll get to my little bone to pick.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that's right, and that's the sense I get in my surveying of the media, that this is not a out of line. There's nobody. Well, actually, Fox Business. Let me read a paragraph from them. Well, I'll read it in a second, but there's three really big pillars to the deal, and in some ways this feels like the modern battle, or even the postmodern battle of between labor and the management and so forth. It was very civilized in its way. It was intelligent. The strike, it wasn't this big brutal strike where they brought down, everybody walked out. They did this plan, and then they did this plan, and they planned it. This UAW president, Sean Fain, I guess, just did a virtuoso performance. So it wasn't, it was demonstrating power without actually, in a sense, using it. And I liked that about it. And that feels like it's evolutionarily appropriate because it's basically just more intelligence being brought onto the system. So anyway, there's this raise, the raise you're talking about, it's 25% over time, I guess. Same salary for everybody doing the same job. That's an interesting pillar of the deal. And then they will have the ability to strike in retaliation for plant closures, which is the third pillar. And that's really interesting too. The same salary for everybody doing the same job is a way of, leveling that field where somebody with seniority, it's always when you can play with somebody making more who's doing the same job, then it just opens the whole sort of system to criticism. The criticism of postmodernity is, why is this person been there longer, but yet they were privileged and it's white and it's male and whatever. So they did away with that. And that's very interesting.
Yeah. And to me, it also seems like it would weaken the union. Like, I don't know much about like the mechanics of this union, but like in the spirit of the workers being like, we are together on this.
Yeah.
It would really weaken that if you're like, well, we're supposedly together, but there's this whole range of salaries for people doing the same job.
Oh yeah, yeah, exactly. So with this, it strengthens
the
union. Yeah, I would say so too. And then also striking in retaliation for plant closings. I lived through the beginning of the Rust Belt. I was in Youngstown, Ohio, in 1974 when all the steel mills closed. And they closed because this is really the beginning of that kind of globalization that just hollowed out the middle class of that whole swath of Rust Belt America. And everybody started buying steel from Japan, and that was that. So these communities are decimated. They're still decimated, Ankur. When I go back home to where I grew up, the downtowns are empty except for a tattoo parlor. It's that kind of thing. And so you can't do that anymore. You can't just ravage a town by just closing the one of the major sources of employment and just walk away because it makes sense to your shareholders. And I like that. It all feels like a move towards a more green, egalitarian, taking more into account, fair kind of a system. And so I like that. But I will read, this is the worst criticism I read of it, and this is from Fox Business. And it's basically the elimination of the tiered wage system really rankled a lot of the people on the right, because it's sort of like, it's anti-meritocracy. Okay, that's how they see it. And in a sense it is, but here we go. US recently, UPS eliminated their two-tiered wage system. If the UAW secures this concession, which they did, the auto industry would be the next domino to fall, putting American industry on the perilous path of self-imposed decline. Negotiators need look no further than communist Mao Zedong's China in the 1950s and 60s to see the disastrous economic effects of this policy. When everyone is paid the same, regardless of their performance or skills, the motivation to excel dissipates. And, if they're reaching back to Mao in the 50s and 60s.
It's definitely more ideological.
I'm good with,
argument.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, because the tiered system, like, I don't know the details of it. I can imagine a way in which it is an actual meritocracy, but I'm really doubtful that that's how it's implemented. Like, if you have, salespeople work on commission, the more you work, the more business you do, the more you get. That's meritocratic. Makes sense to me. I don't know how that applies to what's going on here in these jobs.
Yeah, I don't either. And it's interesting to think about the dynamics of groups and teams. There's a principle that Steve Jobs brought forth at least named and described. It's basically the theory of the A player, and this is what he was completely dedicated to. That he wanted all A players, and he was ruthless. Steve Jobs, people would like shiver in their boots when he walked down the hall. He was an autocrat, but his goal was to have teams of A players, because his idea was when everybody's an A player, then you get 10 times the results. And also these A players love it so much. They're not your normal people on court. They don't really want life balance. They like working through the night. They like getting phone calls at 2. They like being in that, we're really following this guy into building the future, which, to work closely with Steve Jobs or work in Apple at that time would have been, something you tell your grandchildren. So, and then it becomes self-policing. And this is the part that's interesting, because the team itself doesn't want to put up with free riders, or anybody who's not playing at their level. I think there's something, so what these A players, the way Steve Jobs describes them, is what is that? 1% of the population. They're a rarefied group. Not everybody's going to be that way. But is there a way of having teams be, self-policing in a human way? Think back of Indigenous. Everybody was doing their best, and they were, part of that liquid community. I think that, we're smart enough to get more of that online, and I think this is a step in that direction.
Yeah, I definitely see the future of organization as being more decentralized control over culture and incentives, right? And so it makes sense that like the people who are in the room are going to have more of a say about what happens in the room and how they work together.
Yeah,
and everyone's going to arrive at a different equilibrium for the culture that they're interested in.
Yeah. And that, of course, if you talk about the different cultures, that's another one of the critiques of this deal, is that it's raising labor costs in America, which incentivizes the companies to use the factories in Mexico, that sort of thing. I was surprised that there wasn't more of a pushback in that direction, because that's the globalist argument. And there has to be and I think there is actually just a consciousness and cultural reaction to that. That there, even with and of course the government plays a big role in this, a big role. It's like with the electric cars now. If they don't have a certain percentage of parts made in America, then they don't get the $7,000, they don't get the discount. There's some, incentives that the government can control that, you're always trying to balance as evolution continues to create a more egalitarian society over time, and it does. So anyway, I'll stop there because I know that kind of sticks in your craw. And
that's great. Let me just share the quote with you.
Okay.
So this was the part that I was like, I mean, it just goes right to my heart.
Oh, good.
And this is the UAW president. He said, "We wholeheartedly believe our strike squeezed every last dime out of General Motors. They underestimated us. They underestimated you."
Yep.
And what I'm looking for, is a little bit more understanding of the joint nature of this project. Like, and this is like kind of like old school labor relations, where it's just like there's like the labor and the capitalists, and they hate each other, and they're doing their best to like, the capitalists are doing their best to exploit the labor, and they usually do a really good job of that. And then the labor is trying to like demonize the capitalists, and this is some of like the Bernie rhetoric.
Yep.
Which, when it comes to the numbers and the policies and all that, I'm generally like really in favor of it.
Yep.
But the rhetoric, like, I don't think we need to be like this. It's not like we squeezed, they did not actually squeeze every last dime out of General Motors. Like, the amount of profits they've been making largely allows for this negotiation, and there could have been more. There's just tons of profits these days for them. Like I looked up the numbers of the shareholder dividends and CEO comp. There's like tons. They didn't actually do that, but why he wants to like portray this like they won this battle, which they did, and they've been sacrificed a ton since 2008. And so like I applaud the sense of victory, but to create it as a zero-sum game,
Yeah.
I just don't think that's the future of
No.
these relationships.
Yeah.
Like we don't want this to be a zero-sum game, because then it ends up that like the only way for the company to win is to just further exploit the employees or move to somewhere else, or
Right.
it's just perpetuating this dynamic that's like, who's really going to win in the end with this kind of rhetoric?
Yeah. I can't argue with that, Ankur. I think in the sacred world to come, we won't have that kind of rhetoric.
Huh! Say that again. Say it
I
again.
do think that that's a few generations off, not that far, honestly, at all. But in the meantime, what you're talking about is, in a way, critiquing, marginalizing, if you will, that us versus them strata, where, Mike, I'm here to fight the devil. I'm here to fight, man,
Yeah.
and I'm not here to listen to the devil, and I'm not here to, I'm here to win. And that's a strata that is in everybody. It's in what's his name? Sean Fain.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's in all these auto workers, and a lot of these auto workers, they're not, operating from a postmodern. They're modern, whatever. They know how to work in the system and all of that stuff. But there is a natural sort of win, lose, zero sum. That tier is still online, and I just sort of, I think I make more room for, or I surrender to it maybe more than you do. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's just so it's
I
clear
don't know. It's there's no option where that doesn't exist, I guess is what I'm saying.
That's true, but
Yeah.
it's not the future, and it's not necessary. Like this
It's
kind of
not the
comment,
future, and it's not necessary. In the
but
future, we'll know it's not necessary.
yeah. And what I think is so great, I mean, clearly, like you said, this guy, from what I read, he did an amazing job.
Yeah.
And there is this, like, the capitalist dudes are definitely operating from this framework of like,
Yes.
we're gonna just squeeze all the labor out of you and not pay you for it.
Yes.
And so he did an amazing job of like the strategy and the tactics, and that requires thinking in that zero-sum competitive way.
Yes.
So to me, that's really appropriate, the way that like they played the game and they won the game. It's like we're talking about, there's these games, like their team won this round of negotiations. It's really good, but it's in service. And this is the part that I think we forget. The whole game, it's just a game. It's in service of the whole. And in the whole, that they're all on the same side of making us awesome cars.
Yes.
And that's like, that's the part where I feel like the rhetoric is missing it, where it's like, dude, you killed it. You killed it in the negotiations.
Yeah.
And like now let's just like kill it ideologically by getting you can push everyone to the next level of like next time when they understand that supporting us is in their best interest, we won't have to close any plants.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think this deal is a big step in the direction you're talking about, honestly, in terms of, again, this sort of surgical strike. This is literally what they did, these little surgical strikes. That's new, where the actual, there's a rhetorical reality and then there's a real reality. I think that's probably always been true. And that rhetorical reality, it's still fun to fight and win and say we got everything we could and we beat those bastards. And I'm not sure that I know that's politically effective. There's no doubt about it, because that's a big bell for a lot of people that's ringing. In 3 generations, will that bell be ringing? It'll be ringing in a way of play, more fun than it is now with fight, because it's an important bell. It's a lot of passion there. We just don't want to be thinking our way forward. So I don't know, but I think we sort of lay out terrain, right? We're sort of understanding it better. You're helping me to understand it better, because it's not necessary, and it is and it's certainly not necessary at all for probably 20 or 30% of the population, like you and me. I'd put us in that category.
Yeah, but
I wouldn't have a negotiation and ever gloat about it. It wouldn't occur to me to do that.
yeah, and there is, I mean, it's helpful you're saying this because there is something really positive and really necessary
Yeah.
about this vein of commentary or celebration, which is the last part. They underestimated us, they underestimated you. This is really like we did this together.
Yeah.
You are a group, you are fused. We have this identity, we care about each other. The whole like union thing, which is so beautiful. Like together, we're strong, right?
Yes.
And I don't know if you've ever read, God, what is that book called? It's one of the Steinbeck books. It's totally amazing. And they're about these union organizers for the farm workers.
No, I
Oh
did. I
God,
read East of Eden last year, but it wasn't about that.
it's an incredible book. And nobody is a good guy in this whole book. It is so morally complex and ambiguous, and you love the characters. But there's a part where in the beginning, there's a camp of I don't know if they're like striking farm workers or it might be just tramps or some dudes living in the forest. They need something to unite them. This woman's giving birth, and he goes out there and he's like, I'm just gonna butcher this. It's totally not what happened, but it's the same feel. I need 20 people to tear off their shirts and rip them into pieces and sanitize them and bring them to me. Otherwise, this woman's gonna die. And then everyone does that. It totally wasn't necessary. You find out later. But he was like, those people, they needed to feel involved in this process. And I gave them what they wanted. And they felt involved, and everybody felt connected to that birth and that woman. And it brought everybody together that they did that thing. And that's the feeling that you want people to have.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is that you can give people that feeling and celebrate their success, like we've talked about week after week, without having an enemy to demonize. We actually don't need that to feel like we did something together.
Yep.
That's all I'm saying.
Yep. Well, I mostly agree with that. I think some people do need it, and that's okay. What a bummer. I don't want to. I don't know. It's like, the kids on the playground. It's like, there they are. And that's a lot of people, they've still got a lot of kid in them. And it's not always a good way.
No, I mean, but this is what I'm saying is like there's a need there. And the need, like on the playground, there's a need for belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a need for structure and understanding my role. And there's ways of communicating that need and getting that need met that don't look like bullying.
Yeah. Well,
and the bullying often is like not even effective.
Yes. Yeah. No.
And so that's what I'm saying with this statement is that there's a way to meet the need the statement is meeting, but in a way that's even better.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, Ankur. So I'm going back to high school. So we're in the championship of the region or whatever in Western Pennsylvania. And our basketball team is playing the Mohawk team. And they're just in the next town. Just a lot of white people and, sort of the Italians and Poles. It's just all just the same kind of people as we are. Well, we had these cheers where we're down with them and this and that. And it's, the whole thing of, they're the enemy and we're on the bus and we're yelling and we're screaming and we're, and I could still remember the glory of that. And when I look back on it, it's like, oh man, we didn't look far for an enemy. It was just, down the street, the next like farm town.
Yeah.
So, that's, can we do that and go and fight fiercely like Sean Fain did as the UAW president, and not have that contraction of the other, hatred of the other?
Yes.
Fueling
we can. And here's two examples. Two examples you can.
Okay.
So one is, so I played Ultimate Frisbee in college, and there is, I don't know if you're familiar with that sport at
Oh,
all.
sure,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah,
It's I've
you're in
always sort
Boulder.
of
Yeah.
loved it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So there's a thing at after every Ultimate Frisbee game where you huddle with your team and come up with a cheer that you sing about the other team.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Yeah. After you've battled them really sweatily and really intensely, and people getting injured for the whole game,
uh-huh.
and you celebrate their victories and
Oh
you
man,
celebrate
that's so
your
good.
good qualities and their good qualities,
That's so good.
right?
I
But
felt
you,
that. I bet that felt good.
yeah, it's awesome. It's really awesome. So that's possible, and it doesn't mean you're not competitive, and it doesn't mean you
Right.
don't feel good about yourself, and it
Yeah.
doesn't mean you weren't stoked to win or you're not bummed to lose.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, all
Yeah.
those things are still true. So there's
Yes.
that. And
Okay.
then the other side, this is the side of the irony side, is at Stanford, they had, I went to one basketball game because it's not really my thing, but they had these cheers. And I don't know if it's, I think they had, it was called the Sixth Man Club, some kind of like cheering. Maybe it was the band. Again, I don't know. But their cheers, the two I remember, where one was kill, maim, dismember. And the second was punish them for crimes they did not commit. And these were awesome things to yell that like you felt a real sense of unity as a crowd. You know, this whole like, I am the crowd, I'm support, I'm part of this tribe. But they were very clearly ironic. And
Oh
like
my,
obviously we're not dissing
that
the other
is
team.
hysterical. I
So there's
love
ways
that.
to do it, right? There's ways to do it
That's
that's
thank
like,
you. Well, that
let's get this.
when we're talking about we're going to have this, but it'll be in playful context where we're all having a good time.
Yeah.
That's the sacred world to come. That's it. I mean, you're paving the way, man. That's those are both excellent examples.
Yeah.
I love it. I
Isn't that
absolutely love
hilarious?
it. Yeah.
God, I was so excited. I mean, I didn't want to really go to a basketball game, but to be chanting with like 500 other people, punish them for crimes they did not
They did
commit,
not
which is
commit. I love that. That is so great. And what was the first one? Dismember.
kill, maim, dismember. Yeah.
Oh, that is so good. Wow. I'm always delighted to see a new emergent of culture. And it feels like I just saw that. So,
Thank you,
well, how
Jeff.
about that, man?
Thanks for doing
That's
this with me. I
fantastic.
love this.
Yeah, me too. All right. Well, thank you. If there's anybody listening, we don't do much promotion here, but we have a good time. And yeah, so